If I win, me and you come together to create a United Fighters Association to help UFC fighters get better pay and better health care. You become the interim president, and we unite to help these fighters once and for all.
Deal.
Wow.
Let's go.
That's official right there.
So as you just saw, Jake Paul wants to create a fighters association with Anderson Silva. If Jake wins, that's the bet that he made. And, if you watch the entire conference live, you'll notice that there was actually a hint of this earlier when this person asked this question.
Penny Buffington from MMA Fight Coverage. Anderson, I wanted to ask you if the payout for this is comparable to what you were making in the UFC, or is it much higher? And assuming that it is much higher, would you have taken this fight if it wasn't the payout amount? Would you have taken the fight just because you're fighting Jake Paul, or are you fighting for the money?
Let me tell you something.
So Penny Buffington brings up an interesting question, and his answer is quite interesting.
Let me tell you something. When I start fighting UFC, I make good contract. Every single fight, every single moment, I change my contract, I change everything. And I make good money. I don't have crazy life. Of course, I can't say that my last fight in Mexico, I make more money than my two last fight in UFC.
And Anderson Silva just gave you his story. He made more money from one boxing fight than he did in two MMA fights. That tells you a lot. So there's no question now, ever since, these influencers started boxing, the whole issue of fighter pay has come up. And it's become quite apparent that boxers get paid far more money than UFC fighters or MMA fighters in general, which makes sense because boxing has been established and has more, has more companies involved in it than the MMA community does. So it does make more sense that boxers are getting paid more. However, I understand the idea that MMA fighters, they're literally risking their lives every day they go to work. So they should definitely at least have, adequate health care and at least some kind of pension or something so they can be well taken care of regardless of whether they're a champion or not. Now, people are going to be looking at this and they're going to be skeptical about the legitimacy of this fight because of this bet. I don't think this fight is going to be rigged. I think it's a legit fight, 100% all the way. I think even if Anderson Silva wins this fight, which I do believe he will, seriously, he's who I'm going for. I believe he's going to win the fight. I believe even if he wins, he will still help Jake with this Fighters Association in some way. And again, it's an MMA, it's supposed to be an MMA Fighter Association. It's not specifically for the UFC. Also, before his conference, during his show, BS with Jake Paul spoke with Israel Adesanya, whom I'm sure you already know, about the same thing. Fighter pay, healthcare, just taking care of the fighters better, right? Even the people who are just signing up. And Israel explains this very well.
On a more serious note, dude, I know you're friends with Francis, and I just wanted to ask, what's your stance with all this fighter pay conversation going on, and
I've been saying that. I've been saying that we're still working. Jay, you got to realize Rome wasn't built in a day. The changes that we're trying to, create, I probably won't see it, but it's not really about me. It's about the future generation.
And here you can see in this interview, Israel Adesanya, as he said, it's a long process. It's one step at a time. This is not something that can be built in a day or even in a year. It's going to take years. We're talking about contracts. We're talking about prior business arrangements, right? Typically with a big business like the fight business, things have already been set up. Contracts have already been made. Agreements have already been agreed to. And things are done the way they are. And that's how people typically like to leave it. But to literally make it to where a UFC fighter can come into the UFC and, as long as they do a good job and don't break their contract, that they'll essentially be able to retire
even if they're not a world champion, they'll be able to retire and live a decent life. Like, in order to do that, it's going to take, one, a lot of money. It's going to take a lot of funding. All right, they're going to need more sponsors. They're going to need more deals. They're going to need more people trying to do business with them. Put simply, it's going to take more money.
So me, Francis have talked. Me, Francis, Kamaru, and a few other people have talked. You know, just because, it's publicly known that Francis wasn't happy with what was happening. We weren't happy with what was happening. I've heard of what he was getting paid for some of his fights from his own mouth, and I'm shocked that the heavyweight champion of the world was going through that. But again, it's not even about them. I want guys who if you find the UFC, I want that to be like a prestigious thing. Yeah. I want that to be something that you hold your head high and be like, yeah, oh, that guy's a UFC fighter. Even if he's not a champion, you know, that guy's a UFC fighter. Like, the people say, like, he's an NBA player. Like, they just have this prestigious aura about them.